Not much green on the screen, but let's check if there is green in rural India. As we have been telling you, CNBC TV 18 and Religare Capital Markets had an extensive road trip in Uttar Pradesh. For Religare Capital Markets itself, this is their third trip into the rural areas of Indian states. They've already done a fairly extensive road trip in Maharashtra and Gujarat. The idea is to find out the extent of rural distress or the extent of rural demand. We have with us Gautam Trivedi of Religare, who spearheaded this road trip. We also have S. Sridhar of Escorts Agri-Machineries and market researcher and strategist Rama Bijapurkar. All of you, welcome to the show. Gautam, after these three trips, tell us the key takeaways. Is it looking like there is a lot of stress in rural India? We only know of media stories of farm suicides and that unseasonal rain in February, which appears to have dampened demand. But what was your impression?
Yeah, I think what we are finding is that the situation on the ground is not as bad as the media made it out to be. And yes, there were obviously farmer suicides. We actually went to a village in Beed in the Marathwada district where 5 farmers committed suicide specifically in that village. But I think the fact is that, again, we've picked 3 of the most impacted states, so we haven't really gone all India, and there's probably no need to do all India necessarily. But again, generalizing from what we've learned from these 3 states, the situation is not as bad as it's being made out to be by the media, 1. 2, I think what we are finding is that there are certain pockets of sectors that are clearly very, very badly impacted. So you've got cement demand, which is clearly down. Again, that's not so much to do with the rural slowdown. It's more to do with the slump in the overall real estate sector across the country and the lack of infrastructure projects really getting off the ground. The second, what we discovered is that 2-wheelers are largely impacted, tractors are impacted. So we're seeing, various industries within even the auto space that are differentially impacted. At the same time, we found that Maruti Suzuki is doing great business. All of the showrooms that we went across the 3 states, and we probably did about 7 to 8 showrooms, were packed with customers. So rural slowdown is having a very limited impact on something like Maruti, for example. But 2-wheelers are impacted. CVs, again, are doing extremely well. So again, very interestingly, you've got a very different dynamic that M and HCVs are doing very strong numbers, but LCVs and ICVs are very, very badly impacted. So I think these are some of the interesting things coming out. The other thing I want to talk about is the FMCG sector. And that took us completely by surprise. We were shocked. In Kanpur, we met the dealer for Godrej, Marico, and Cadbury, and he said his business for the year ended FY15 was up as much as 22%. The first 2 months of this fiscal are already up 20%. So he's not seeing any slowdown. And we had a similar reaction also in Maharashtra, where the Colgate distributor is saying his business is rocking. ITC is seeing no slowdown as well. Okay. So I think very mixed trends emerging from the trip.
Okay, let me just put one argument, which is the standard stereotyped arguments that we have got over the last 24 months. So, which is why I'm saying it's not a media creation. It was also an economist creation. Sure. But, the construction space, which was booming in India, and we saw it as a share of GDP rising over the last 10 years, had drawn about 11 percentage point of labor from rural areas. People dependent in rural jobs had fallen from some 63% to 54% or thereabouts over 10 years. And that trend reversed. We could see that in rural wages, which is put out by the Ministry of Labour. Yeah. Rural wages kept falling over the last 1 year. They'd risen sharply from 2008 to 2012-13, but 2014 it was falling every month up until November to single digits. Sure. So, we were told that there is a rural wage fall issue which is constraining demand. You don't buy that?
No, we don't buy that. I think the reality is that, farmers have other sources of income. So it's not only farming.
Rural wages.
And, there's a whole bunch of other income sources, not to mention that typically one member of the family, especially in UP, even in Bihar, and for that matter, even in Gujarat, you end up seeing them actually coming to metros like Mumbai, Delhi, or Kolkata and actually gaining employment. So it's not as if the farmer is 100% dependent only on farm income. So that, I think, is a clear indication. The other thing I want to talk about really that's interesting, and I think, Rama, you might want to jump on this, is the fact that we believe at the end of these 3 trips is that food inflation is here to stay. I think this is a major problem that we are seeing across the country. And I think there are a bunch of reasons for that. I think let's get a little sympathetic towards farmers because, they have seen a rapid rise in their input costs, starting with labor. Labor actually has zoomed. In fact, the farmer that we met in Gujarat very clearly said that I really wonder who's going to be doing this business in the next 10 to 15 years, because the reality is second generation does not want to do farming. They want to work in an urban town, or they want to go to Surat and be in the diamond business. So I think there are various challenges the farmers are facing: rising pesticide costs, rising fertilizer costs. So all of that, and of course after all that, you're dependent on the monsoon. So I don't think food inflation is going down anytime soon. I think that's something which is actually one of our biggest takeaways from these trips.
Okay. Mr. Sridhar?
No, I thought, Rama, you wanted to develop on that point that, Gautam was making. Rural wages may be falling, but we have to understand farmer demand from a different perspective. How should we understand rural demand? It's not, rural wages is not an indicator?
Well, I think firstly looking at rural as a totality is a big problem, because the way rural is defined is 1 minus urban. So there are 50 shades of green. And of course there are districts and places where the share of rural of agriculture is much greater and where share of agriculture is lower. Broadly speaking, I agree with you that our think tank data, ICE360 data, shows that about 43% of income is coming out of agriculture. And this varies from place to place. And looking at the trends of what is being sold, I would strongly urge that we start moving from what is being sold to who is actually buying, because it seems the rich are okay. It's the middle that's getting squeezed. And as far as FMCG is concerned, we do know that on a 10-year basis, for the first time in India, the lower quintiles of income households have grown faster than the urban in terms of income. Okay. And if you take that into account, the thing with FMCG, they get lucky when you have a whole lot of people who buy a little bit more each, and that adds up to a lot. So I think it is true that rural has diversified. It is true that there are 50 shades of green. It's true that if you walked another 150 kilometers, you may see a different pattern of what is being sold. Sure. But by and large, it's right that food inflation is here to stay. We're seeing a lot of households where people are, the dual households as we call them, or non-agricultural households, are also much larger. And it is my disappointment that at this point in time, we should be actually having more processed food businesses, right? We should now be making sure that we have our tomatoes that are pureed and, everything else, because we're not wedded to fresh. We're just wedded to not having to pay 100 rupees for a kilo of beans.
Yes.
I don't know when you last went shopping.
No, only beans were expensive. The rest of it has actually
come down.
Yeah.
Okay. So as a strategist, Rama, you, at least one of your notes I was reading, you've diversified it into developed rural, emerging rural, as an underdeveloped rural. Which segment, according to you, amongst these three will be growing faster in the next 10 years? And therefore, which pockets of consumption will do well?
So our ICE360 data basically, we've divided it up based on census data of a whole set of indicators which are relating to consumption, relating to demographics and so on. Emerging rural, developed rural, which is actually about 26 million households, really is as good, in fact better than a lot of urban. And that's really urban itself. So if you look at the definition of rural, developed rural really comes somewhere between what we call niche cities and boom towns, and it is the underdeveloped rural. So if you divide rural into two, you have 100 million households roughly which are underdeveloped rural, and you have the rest of the world. So the rural-urban continuum is blurring. And so, what is going to grow if these 100 million start getting infrastructure ahead of everybody else? It's wonderful times ahead for the ITCs and the levers. Absolutely. The minute you start putting in roads, we find that when public transport grows, private transport grows. And you might wonder, why do people want to buy when there's public transport? And they tell you, when we have nowhere to go, we don't go anywhere. Okay. And when we have somewhere to go, we actually want to go now on our own time and place. So you'll see different patterns coming up. But it's really 50 shades of green, at the risk of repeating myself, because it's a definitional thing.
Okay. We have to get Mr. S. Sridhar's view. He's the CEO of Escorts Agri-Machinery. Mr. Sridhar, you've been listening to this conversation. What we hear is that the rural rich are not affected. It's probably the rural middle that has been squeezed, where we see it as evidence of less demand for two-wheelers. What's your assessment? We did see a lot of tractor sales falling off for several companies. So is this a demand issue? Is it that even for tractors, there is rural distress?
Okay. Lada, I think I will pick it up from where Mr. Gautam has left it. Conditions are nearly not all that bad. So tractor is almost 100% a rural product. So my window to the rural world is only through the industry behavior of tractors. I'll just show you certain conditions about the tractors. So I think when we see a tractor industry, we see it in three different formats. One is underlying conditions, another is an enabling environment, third one is sentiment. Out of these three, sentiments are much more important. Just to look at the data per se, then you will understand why these things are, why I am saying it's not all that bad. Excepting the year 13-14 when the growth rate was something like a 20%. And the last year was something like a 13%. If you adjust it, still, yes, 7% over the peak, highest peak ever the tractor industry has achieved. It's not a bad situation at all. Compared to the 11, 12, 12, 13, the current data shows that it is at least 5% better than those kind of an industry. So this is not the reason. Monsoon quantity is not the reason. It is the spatial and the time is the reason. Sometimes monsoon can be a spoiler, like a February and March monsoon. So these things are not really important. And also structure is also not important. See, for example, 13-14 was a pre-election year. Lot of that rural employment guarantee money has flown into the system, and I think rural inflation, food inflation was the highest, MSP was very good. This I call it as an enabling environment. Last 2 years there is no such enabling environment. Government was also not in a hurry to do those kind of things. If you ask me between these two, the third point what I said, sentiment is the most important. Let us understand the industry this way. I think 2-3 years back the similar situation, one of the major player in the tractor industry has almost shut down some 3 out of their 5 plants, saying that they do not see the recovery happen. And they said it in the first month, that the next month they were to run on a 3 shift to cater to the demand. In other words, this industry also can be on a fire if the sentiment revival happens. So there are few conditions for sentiment, and I think the industry has to be more in terms of keep the cost structure down, be nimble, and then anticipate on when those kind of fire going to catch on.
Okay. Mr. Sridhar, can good rains make a difference?
Yeah, when I said sentiment, I think on-time rainfall and then good start, certainly an enhancer of sentiment. Food inflation, like the way Mr. Gautam was saying, is an enabler, which I have mentioned right last time also. So it looks sometimes unpolitical, but it is a food inflation is an enabler actually. Likewise, there are few more conditions. If it is met, sentiments will be on fire, and we do expect those things to happen actually in 6 months. That's why right last time I said the Q3 and Q4 can be a turning point once again.
So have inquiries gone up, sir, in the last 10 or 15 days, considering the good start to the monsoons?
Not everywhere, but the point is, see, if I'm to tell you like last, say like 5-6 months, the industry was almost down by 30%. Now already has minus 30% has already become something like a minus 17%. You will see it is coming like a 15%. It will start falling rapidly and then moving into positive territory in a matter of 4 or 5 months.
Okay. Gautam, what was your understanding of the monsoon impact? I mean, does it dampen demand considerably, or has a large part of the rural society or rural economy, not entirely connected to monsoon?
No, I think it is. It has a major impact, as Mr. Sridhar was saying, sentimentally as well as financially, undoubtedly.
He said sentimentally. He doesn't seem to say so much financially.
But I think it will impact financially, because the fact of the matter is that a lot of the farmers that we met, especially in Maharashtra, I think Maharashtra seems to be more prone for, I'm not sure what reasons, but a lot of the farmers actually had a lot of indebtedness from local money lenders who are charging anywhere from 3 to 4% per month, shockingly. So I think that clearly is a major problem. So financially, if the monsoon is good, it will be good for them financially.
Okay. Gautam, you indicated that in your 3 road trips, you've seen weakness in cement, tractors, two-wheelers, while FMCG and Maruti, Maruti dealers have shown pretty good growth. Tactically, would you be playing this?
No, I think Maruti is the stock to own for a 3 to 5 year view. Stock will easily double from these current levels. And the fact is, I think, put it very simplistically, what the dealer in Faizabad told us. And, sometimes you end up meeting people who say things that are simple and honest, and it really hits home. He said, as the country develops more roads, more Marutis will be sold. And that's really, I think, what the forecast is.
It's got nothing to do with demand, really.
No, demand will come because as you get more roads. I mean, you need roads to to go somewhere, right?
What I mean is it's not the question of economic power. Yes, you were saying something.
No, I thought we do pretty well in Bombay without too much roads. We still buy cars. But our data also shows our modeling that every unit of infrastructure will drive more demand now than every unit of increase in income. So that's, I think, something to note.
Right. Have you all made any studies of NREGS and its impact? Because that was income and not infrastructure.
Yeah, so we've actually looked at who actually got the NREGS money, and it's fairly scattered. The rich have got it, the poor have got it. But we understand that it has kind of set a base rate for labor. It's like a LIBOR rate for labor, so to speak. And so even if you are in very rural Tamil Nadu, whoever comes to clean your house will charge you 150 rupees a day because there's an alternative. So now we have to watch what happens when if the minimum wage actually comes up, because that is going to take even the lowest income group significantly higher.
Okay. Sorry.
No. Gautam, your expertise also lies in finding out when the turning point takes place in many of the sectors which are not doing so well. So you can buy it at attractive valuations. So would cement, tractors and two-wheelers, anything in the data which suggests that these sectors are now turning around in your conversations?
No, I think it's too early. Cement clearly, I think, is in for a slump. And like I said, it's not connected so much to the rural economy. It's more connected with the lack of infra projects and the nationwide housing slump that we're seeing, and that's across the country. So I don't see cement demand coming back anytime soon. Again, monsoon's obviously a very lean period. So cement demand, if it comes back, probably was going to be last quarter of this fiscal year, I think, realistically, or even hopefully earlier. But I mean, I think that's what we believe is going to happen. And as far as the other sectors are concerned, we believe that the CV market's clearly doing well. So in the case of Maruti and M&H CVs, it's postponed demand that's now coming out. So that's what it really is. And of course, sentiments definitely improved since the Modi government came into power.
Two-wheelers you don't see are troughing out?
Not yet. And the reason is that most of the dealers that we spoke to said that 70 to 80% of their two-wheeler demand actually came in scooters, not in motorcycles. So I think motorcycles are usually a better benchmark of the economy reviving, because in this case of scooters,
so it's a change in taste and not want of demand.
Well, I don't think I'm not sure if it's necessarily a change of taste, so people are down trending towards scooters. But the scooters can be used by virtually every member of the family, men and women can drive.
No, that's what I'm saying. So maybe they're understanding it wrongly. The companies are selling the wrong products. People want scooters, and we are measuring demand by motorcycles.
A lot of the dealers did tell us that Bajaj has made a big mistake by exiting the scooter business, and I'm sure they know what they're doing, but that's just a comment from the audience.
But I'd like to make the point that when we look at demand as from what companies sell, I think we make a big mistake. Our data shows consumers are far more optimistic when we ask them, "Achhe din aane wale hain," as your incomes improve, where do you think they're going? I think India Inc. also displays bullish and bearish tendencies in how it chooses to market. So, I mean, sometimes Maruti sales doing well could just mean that Maruti has decided to actually step on the gas a little more, so to speak. Okay. Or when you say that there is no demand or there is low demand, I mean, I understand it from a supply trend, but the supply trend is not actually where the demand lies. So when India Inc. also starts getting its confidence back to match the consumer confidence, I think we will see music happening, and hopefully it will be in sync, because the consumer is ready and waiting.
Okay. So what would be your key takeaways of rural demand? I know you have said that it is 50 shades, but would your conclusion be that the low is growing very well and it's only the middle that is having a problem, and that is only a cyclical problem?
Yeah, it's exactly the same as urban, I think, except that there is a sentiment issue. But I think similarly in urban, I mean, if we see a greater cut in interest rates, I mean, a lot of things are going to sing. So I think by and large, we're okay. It's also a question of what we think it should be versus what it is. And I think we'd all better get ready for the fact that the glory days when we pushed on all cylinders and ran up NPAs and, so on are over. So if you look at what is the aukat of what we can actually do in terms of what is our entitlement, I think it's quite okay. So, yeah, I wouldn't see any alarm signals. But, your markets function a little bit differently from my markets.
Okay. Your final key takeaways would be this, that the top notch of rural demand is fine. Yep. It's only the middle which is going through a cyclical downturn, and the lower end, which represents FMCG demand, is actually very healthy. Is that the conclusion we should take?
Yeah, I don't know specifically about the middle end or the low end, but the fact is what we are finding is that specifically on FMCG, that's something to think about. ITC itself has actually made a comment that the number of local brands have now basically gone from 13% to 20%, and we actually saw a lot of evidence of that. So what we're seeing, and what's interesting is, you saw the big deal that took place 2 weeks ago on this company called Kesh King, which nobody had heard of, until 6 years, and within 6 years he's obviously created a fortune for himself. The reality is there's so many local brands coming up that are actually giving fierce competition to the established brands. So what I'm trying to say is that while the overall pie is increasing, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to translate into profits for all the leading listed companies, because the competition from local brands is significantly intensifying.
Okay, Mr. Sridhar, one last comment from you. You told us that the degrowth from 30% has come down to almost 17% for the industry. By when do you expect the tractor industry to show a growth? What is Escort's own forecast, company forecast?
I think there are a couple of things to do is this is a good time for every company to cut down in terms of cost structure to make them much more flexible. For example, material cost and manpower cost is a big focus for Escort internally. So that will make us much more nimble. Now, when it comes to anticipation, I think Q2 will remain as a recovery month because the seasons got pushed into October and November. Deepavali this time happens in mid of November. So the big season will happen in the month of October. So compared to the last years of minus 20% to this year's season, it will look like a very big jump. But from then onwards, you will look at a recovery. Possibly, I think March, April, May onwards, it will be a boom time, will be back. So anywhere, I think my guess is anywhere around 15 to 20%, 25% is the kind of a growth possibility is what we would like to forecast.
Oh, that's the very pleasant note on which to end this conversation, Mr. Sridhar. Boom time in April, but recovery starting fairly strongly in October itself. Thank you very much, Mr. Sridhar, for joining us.
Thank you.
Both of you, Rama and Gautam, thank you very much for joining us.
Always a pleasure.